Good morning, my friends. Thank you very much for being here with me. I'm gonna keep on reading Break the Cycle lesson 1.26. The link is down below so we can read it together so that we both have more willpower. Reduce excessive fears and common symptoms and recovery goals, okay? Usually on these lessons I avoid giving my opinion in order to respect Peter Gerlach's work. However, for me, it is a little incomplete, of course. We can only have a complete overview of who we are from several different subjects or disciplines, okay? But I would advise you to check the other videos about numerology, astrology, human design, and also it is important to see what is your blood type, okay? So, skipping the first few paragraphs. Identify several things you currently worry about fear. Then reflect on how you cope with these feelings and describe out loud. Recall how each of your main childhood caregivers dealt with anxieties and fears, and compare their strategies to yours. What do you notice? Anxiety, worry, fear, and terror are instinctive neurohormonal responses which protect us from pain, injury, or death. When based on accurate versus distorted perceptions, normal fears help to keep us safe in the world. All infants, kids, and adults have a spectrum. Sorry, I'm sneezing. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Okay. I think I'm getting sick. Anxiety, worry, fear, and terror, and instinctive neurohormonal responses which protect us from pain, injury, or death. When based on accurate versus distorted perceptions, normal fears help to keep us safe in the world. All infants, kids, and adults have a spectrum of local and global fears that flux as their inner and outer worlds change moment by moment. Young kids traumatized before birth and or deprived of effective nurturance, for example, consistent protections, can grow unaware of frequent fears about criticism, rejection, okay. Criticism, rejection, scorn, and abandonment by primary people, root original terror of being shamed and or alone and helpless. Okay? The unknown risking change because most childhood surprises yield major physical and psychological pain, and young kids may live with anxieties about emotional overwhelm and disorientation, too many intense stimulations and emotions in others or in themselves. This can manifest as fear of losing control, conflict, prolonged confusion, and fear of failing, and fears of success and failure. For example, of shame and guilt judged by inner and outer critics and feeling powerless. Fear of excessive fears, and finally, fear of pain, injury, and death. When the child feels too many intense fears, too often lacks reliable societies and protectors. They may become fear-based. Their personality is often dominated by defensive, cautious, hyper-alert sub-selves who believe life is unsafe and reliable help is rare. Without effective help and encouragement, such kids bring this persuasive feel for attitude into adulthood. If kids were ridiculed or punished for their fears, what pathetic scared cat, wimp, yellow belly, winkling sissy. They grow adept at minimizing, pretending that denying that. Being fear-based or shame-based is a clear symptom of false self-dominance, sub-selves, and excessive fears. See how you feel about these premises. All normal personalities are comprised of a group of dedicated semi-independent sub-selves, like talented players in an orchestra or sports team. Locally and over time, these inner teams range from peaceful and harmonious to conflictual and disorganized, depending on many factors. All anxiety, fear, and terror springs from primal instincts like fear of spiders and snakes, and ruling sub-selves. Primary distrust that you can avoid physical and emotional pain and injury well enough, and that the inner and outer environments are safe enough. The real psychological wounds to assess and reduce are sub-selves: A. Confusing past times with the present. B. Reality distortions. The number A, or the letter A, confusing past times with the present, is that This is PTSD, in my opinion. So it means that the reality you are living in right now and you're still thinking in the past. Okay? B. Reality distortions. C. Distrust in the self, abilities to consistently keep them safe. Anxiety, worrying, and fear are not bad, negative in themselves. They are useful guides to recognizing the feeling current needs, discomforts. The problem is that fearful sub-selves distrust the wise resident true self to keep them safe. They can disable him or her to make unwise local decisions. This is like reactive rookies trying to do a veteran's coach or manager's job. The overscared sub-selves are usually inner children who live in the past, and their attentive guardian sub-selves. Skilled inner family therapy or equivalent can raise their true self-trust and inner confidence and free the true self to lead, which brings excessive fears down to normal. Sub-self fears are usually unconscious reflexes, not rational responses. So trying to reason with a fear-based child or adults risks raising their anxiety, grief, shame, and confusion and frustration, blaming or scoring a person for being to actions or discounting their feelings. You have nothing to fear, risks increasing their sub-selves, and certainly that they are wrong or bad. Reassurances versus empathetic acknowledgements of fear are often rely about reducing the reassurance discomfort. Do you agree? Sub-selves, anxieties, and fears usually have several levels. There is one or more conscious surface fears that you can describe. I don't like speaking in front of a group. And underneath that one or more semi-conscious or unconscious fears, I, my sub-selves get nervous, stutter, and say dumb things. So people laugh at me and disrespect me and feel embarrassed and stupid. Often there is even a deeper core terror with roots in easy or forgotten childhood trauma. If I talked at at family or public meals, Daddy always jeered at me in front of everyone. I felt so bad. Before true wound reduction, excessive fear, shame, and guilt often reinforce each other. Many fear-based people are so shame-based, their dominant sub-selves believe they are inadequate, worthless, and unlovable. So they automatically feel risking and even thinking various things and feel guilty and ashamed for being spineless wimp in their tireless inner critic scornful film. This is like an athletic team or orchestra being dominated by several insecure players who scorn themselves and the group despite the coaches or conductors' attempts to affirm, develop, and harmonize their real talents. Excessive fear can amplify itself. Fear of intense emotions can manifest. I am scared to feel how afraid I am, which promotes coping strategies like those which promote shame, guilt, and compound insecurities. These all reinforce false self-dominance until proactive wound recovery lesson. People in true versus pseudo recovery from psychological wounds can learn to identify what their distrustful sub-selves really need, and they feel them. Uncovering roots fears helps to reduce surface fears. Before I speak to a group now, I reassure my scared inner kids that that's not in the audience. My ideas are important and legitimate, and that we are okay whether people laugh at us or not. Typical false self strategies. From trial and error, sorry what I just did, but I'm really sick. I'm not sick, I've been sick for 4 weeks. I didn't have voice for 4 weeks, and now I think I went out on the weekend. There was a mistake. And I'm sick again. For trial and error, dominant personality sub-selves involve ways to cope with their fears and inner worlds. These may become semi-conscious or unconscious reflective until wound healing progress makes them conscious. For more common strategies are intellectualizing or overanalyzing, avoiding I'm not going to bother with these boring lesson worksheets, over-focusing on the past or on the future, a form of avoidance, procrastinating I will get around to reading this in the wood stuff soon, self-distracting via chemicals, activity, sleep, fantasizing and obsessing, mind churning, numbing, I don't feel anything, minimizing, yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable but not scared, catastrophizing, mentally preparing for the very worst however unlikely it may be, denying, nah, I'm not scared of bankruptcy, lying, why, no, I haven't had a cigarette in weeks, compulsive controlling, feelings, relationships, conversations and situations. any of these look familiar until in true versus pseudo wound recovery, habitual fear protection like these tend to reinforce each other. For example, I feel stupid and guilty for catastrophizing all the time, so I minimize my worries. Don't think about them. Keep busy, and I don't tell other people how uneasy I am most of the time. I know I shouldn't do these things so much, but I can't help it. When your true self is steadily in charge, she will admit fears promptly, without guilt or shame. Decide what he or she you needs to do about them, what resources you need, and proactively and patiently fill your needs so fears subside to normal levels. She or he will also find ways to rescue and scared selves who live in the past. I usually spiritual faith to help to manage significant fears. How can I tell if your fears are excessive? Common symptoms of excessive fears. Dominance of over-fearful subselves cause common thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The behaviors are also shaped by other psychological wounds. See which of these may feel familiar in or someone you know. 1. Over-avoidance and inevitable inner and interpersonal conflicts. My partner and I never fight. 2. Compulsive planning, helping and or rescuing their key adults and kids. 3. Freezing, panicking, exploiting, fleeing and or aggressing when others show strong emotions. Equating and raised or intense voice and or angry face, you are yelling at me. 5. Repeatedly rationalizing and tolerating toxic, controlling, shaming, and hurtful relationships. 6. Habitual black and white bipolar thinking and major discomfort with ambivalence or uncertainty. 7. Unreasonable guilt and or anxiety, worry over crying and raging. 8. Chronic free-floating anxiety. 9. Compulsive apologizing, also a symptom of excessive shame. 10. Often walking on eggshells with key people and doing nothing about it. More common symptoms of excessive fears. 11. Frequent high discomforts, asserting needs and opinions, saying no, or controlling self or others. For example, difficulty setting and enforcing appropriate personal boundaries, limits. I made a video explaining what boundaries are, okay? It's also from Break the Cycle, okay? It's in this playlist. There is a playlist called Break the Cycle, okay? So I'm reading all the lessons from Peter Garlick. You can listen on the radio, on the car, on the train, when you are commuting. 12. Identifying with or vehemently denying codependence, also an excessive shame symptom. Compulsively choosing approach avoid or no relationships despite painful outcomes. Automatically repressing, numbing and or withholding, not expressing some of most emotions. A notable compulsion to control people, events, perceptions and our feelings, excessive preoccupation with what if. Major discomforts with changing beliefs, behaviors, and or surroundings, taking risks, living an overly structured, ritualized life, never going out or traveling. 17. Repeatedly picking emotionally unavailable wounded partners and associates and complaining about that, rationalizing or denying it or not noticing it. 18. Compulsively shading the truth or lying directly or by omission and denying it. 19. A history of relationship of cut-offs and failures, including divorces. 20. An obsessive need for lists or clear rules and plans and predicting the future. That's impossible. 21. Avoidance of or inability to tolerate emotional and physical intimacy. That's a problem with the feminine energy, magnetism. Okay. 22. Avoidance of significant anxiety about personal commitment. 23. Smiling or chuckling double messages when scared, confused, hurt, or angry. 24. Frequent inability to describe current feelings, emotions, and on-body sensations. 25. Computing what I should feel now versus spontaneous feeling. 26. Excessive procrastination and or being chronically late and claiming I can't help it. 27. Chronic facial tics, jaw grinding and muscle head or stomach aches or pains. 28. Always being analytical, intellectual, or in my head. 29. Being unable to describe clearly what I don't like and what or need. 30. Feeling or showing no appropriate shock, anger and sadness, grief over major physical and abstract losses, also symptom of difficult bonding. 21. Frequently not breathing shallowly and being unaware that until people point it out, a related symptom is frequent use of tobacco, which reduces oxygen absorption and mutes feelings of emotions like anxiety and fear. 32. Never arguing, getting angry or upset, or showing strong emotions without major anxiety, guilt, repetitive apologizing. Usually having an expressionless face, a frozen body, and or flat voice. Periodic depressions and or uncontrollable rage or weeping attacks despite painful persona and social consequences, including post-attack shames, embarrassment, guilt, and or fear of losing control. 35. Frequent catastrophizing, focusing on the worst possible outcomes of human natural situations and having a steady, cyclical, skeptical, pessimistic view of life. 36. Stubbornly justifying or denying avoidance of appropriate professional, medical, spiritual, and psychological help in person or in the media, self-neglect, and also a symptom of excessive shame. These are typical behavioral symptoms of excessive self-feels. Do you see yourself or someone else here? Reflect for a moment on your favorite worries and fears. How have they been shaping your relationships, finances, occupations, and health? Try completing this sentence repeatedly. I'm worried that and that and that. The more of these fear traits you or someone has, the higher the odds he or she is dominated by a well-meaning false self. Recall, this is one of the several psychological wounds assessment checklists. If you or an adult has too many of these 36 symptoms, too often a subjective opinion, what can you do to reduce them and grow more confident, serene, and productive? A typical fear reduction goals, well-meaning catastrophizer, worry, and cynic doubter sub-selves often keep your insecure, untrusting sub-selves anxious. A reactive magician sub-self may help by protectively distorting reality, and a number who mutes and anesthetizes unsafe emotions. Often the inner critic hips and scorns the sub-selves for being a wimp, scared-eye, cat, doormat, coward, lily-livered, weak, yellow, timid, which inexorably nourishes inner kids' excessive guilt or shame. People who choose to reorganize their personality sub-selves under the leadership of a true self, that's me, can work patiently towards targets like this. Yes, I have to say that I have my moon in Capricorn. Slow and steady wins the race. I've done a lot of work in the last 20 years. Adopt the attitude like emotions. I'm very proud of myself. I'm sorry. And it's a healthy pride. Adopt the attitudes like the emotions, anxiety, and fear are useful versus positive and or negative responses. Identify your current significant and or chronic anxieties and fears. Decide which you can or can't affect and use this awareness to fill your current needs. Learn to recognize surface symptoms that indicate repressed fear, for example, those above, and the difference between health promoting and toxic anxiety and fear. Investigate possible connections between terrified inner kids and their guardians, subselves, and their chronic or physical symptoms you experience. For example, cramps, muscular tics or spasms, migraines, asthma, and insomnia. Digestive problems, ulcers, isolated or mute subselves can promote such symptoms in a desperate attempt to be noticed and comforted. For example, read this brief research summary on significant health risks of chronic anxiety. Tailor this part-work strategy to reducing excessive or chronic anxiety to fit your situation. Tailor and apply these options for building your self-confidence. Continue progressing with lesson 1 here, part 3. Consider investigating in the unique trauma recovery guidebook Who's Really Running Your Life. Awarenesses. Recap. This article is one of the series on recognizing and reducing 6 widespread psychological wounds. It offers perspective on excessive versus normal fears and summarizes typical wound symptoms and wound reduction goals and options. The article suggests that our emotions from anxiety, worry to fears to terror are healthy unconscious response reflex designed to protect us from pain, injury, and death. Like all emotions, fears help to recognize that we have important current needs to identify and feel. This article proposes that excessive local and chronic fears are caused by protective personality subselves which aren't learned to trust the wise resident true self. Other manager subselves and the begin higher power will reliably keep them safe. Once this is accepted, patient commitment to some form of inner family therapy can raise this trust and reduce excessive fears to normal levels. So this is it. Thank you very much for listening to me. Comment, like, subscribe, hit the bell button for donations. There is the email down below, and for requests too. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.